How's it going, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Thorn's Jungle. Take a step in, have a look around. There are man-eating plants in this jungle, which is what we're going to be talking about on this episode. But before we get into it, if you haven't already, whatever you're listening to this podcast on, or whatever you're watching it from, please subscribe and rate the show. It really helps. And if you really want to, you can join my Patreon and get an extra episode each week that is only exclusive to Patreon members. And you can also check out some Thorn's Jungle merch. Got a nice mug here, Thorn's Jungle mug. Everything tastes better from this mug. So you can head over to the store. The link will be in the description. There's other merch as well on there. Alright, let's get into it. So today's episode is on man-eating plants. That's right, plants that eat men or women, as we'll find out later on in the episode. A woman cops it sweet. Around the time when Charles Darwin was doing his thing, around 1875, he wrote a book called Insectivorous Plants. And in this book, he described plants that move. So, pitcher plants, Venus flytraps, plants that consume animals. Now, this was basically unheard of to people, and they were kind of freaking out because nobody knew plants could be carnivorous. Now, pitcher plants can get big. They can hold upwards of 2 liters of water, and basically animals crawl around the rim and fall into the plant. It's like a cup, and that plant, its juices and enzymes break down the animal once it's died in that plant. But pitcher plants can get so big that sometimes even rats fall in there and can't get out. So they have been known to consume rats. Now, Venus flytraps don't get as big as pitcher plants, but they still can trap vertebrates like frogs and things like that. But the plants we're going to be talking about are said to consume human beings. And there's a few of them. And there's a lot of debate as to whether or not these plants ever existed, and also where these plants were actually found. It's a little iffy. But we'll get into that. I will go through what these plants are, what they look like, what they claim to do, and also some actual testimony from people that have claimed to see them and also witness them consuming people. Pretty damn cool. I mean, it's something out of, like, obviously Little Shop of Horror. That's the first one that comes to mind. Or Jumanji. That's another pretty cool one. And it's like the ultimate old world exploration, jungle mystery action adventure. Alright, you go into this strange jungle and the plants there are a danger. Not just from their spikes or, whatever poison they have on their leaves. No, they will grab a hold of you and eat you. How cool. So the first one we're going to get into is apparently found on Madagascar. Now, for those of you that don't know much about Madagascar, it's the 4th largest island on the planet. It is huge. It's basically, they call it a mini continent. And there's all sorts of environments and habitats on Madagascar. So there's like rainforest, there's savanna, there's wetlands, there's mountainous areas. It is literally a island continent, and it is huge, and there are a lot of animals and things on Madagascar that are still being discovered. People are still discovering species of lemur on Madagascar. I think they're up to 100 species of lemur now that has been described on Madagascar. So what else is there on that island? Apparently huge man-eating trees. Now, what I'm actually reading from is an article from Carl Schucker. Carl Schucker's awesome. He's a British guy that is a real highly respected cryptozoologist, essentially. Him and I have had some chats between each other. He's a really cool dude. But he writes really good articles and does really good research on a lot of cryptozoology subjects. And so a lot of what I'm going to read to you is what he's researched and I'm stealing. So in the early 1870s, a biologist, Dr. Omelius Fredlowski, I nailed that name, had some letters from Western explorers claiming to have seen and witnessed plants eating a person. And this is on Madagascar. This letter that Pulowski, was that his name? Fuck me. This letter that Fredlowski had was from an explorer called Carl Liesche. He was a German explorer who had been visiting a primitive tribe in Madagascar called the Mkodos. While he was there, he and another Westerner called Hendrik were shown the grotesque tree, which the Mkodos referred to as the tepe, and apparently they sacrifice humans to this tree. So this is the letter that this explorer wrote. If you can imagine a pineapple 8 feet high and thick in proportion, resting upon its base and denuded of leaves, you will have a good idea of what the trunk of the tree looks like. It was a dark, dingy brown and apparently hard as iron. From the apex of this truncated cone, 8 leaves hung sheer to the ground. These leaves were about 11 or 12 feet long, tapering to a sharp point that looked like a cow's horn, and with a concave face thickly set with strong thorny hooks. The apex of the cone was a round, white, concave figure like a smaller plate set within a larger one. This was not a flower, but a receptacle, and there exuded into a clear, treacly liquid, honey sweet, and possessed of violent, intoxicating, and soporific properties. Good description. From underneath the rim of the undermost plate, a series of long, hairy green tendrils stretched out in every direction. These were 7 or 8 feet long. Above these, 6 almost transparent palpi, or tentacles, reared themselves towards the sky, twirling and twisting with marvelous, incessant motion. Thin as reeds, apparently, they were yet 5 or 6 feet tall. So, it's a pretty thick set tree, kind of pineapple shaped, with leaves that come out of the top and down, and at the top of the base is these tendrils that move around, apparently, and it secretes a sweet nectar. You know, you catch more, what is it? You catch more flies with honey than vinegar. You know, it's a good alluring, it's literally you're honeypotting your victim. Suddenly, after a shrieking session of prayers to this sinister tree, the natives encircled one of the women in their tribe and forced her with spears to climb its trunk until at last she stood at its summit, surrounded by its tentacles, dancing like snakes on all sides. The natives told the doomed woman to drink, so she bent down and drank the treacle-like fluid filling the tree's upmost plate, and began wild with hysterical frenzy. So she drank out of the tree's sort of bowl-like receptacles that it creates this viscous, sweet liquid, and almost immediately started going loopy from it. So I guess it has some kind of like psychedelic properties. It continues. She did not jump down, as she seemed to intend to. Oh no, the atrocious cannibal tree. That's not true, it's not a cannibal, otherwise it'll be eating other trees. Anyway, the atrocious cannibal tree that had been so inert and dead became suddenly savage. The slender, delicate tentacles, with the furry and starved serpents, quivered a moment over her head. then fastened upon her in sudden coils round her neck and arms. Then, while her awful screams and yet more awful laughter rose wildly, to be instantly strangled down again into a gurgling moan, the tendrils, one after another, like green serpents with brutal energy and infernal rapidity, rose, retracted themselves, and wrapped her around in a fold after fold, ever tightening with cruel swiftness and the savage tenacity of anacondas fastening upon their prey. And now the great leaves slowly rose and stiffly erected themselves in the air. They approached one another and closed around the dead and hampered victim with the silent force of a hydraulic press and the ruthless purpose of a thumbscrew. While I could not see the bases of these great levers pressing more tightly towards each other, from there trickled down the stalk of the great stem of the viscous honey-like fluid mingled horribly with the blood and oozing viscera of the victim. At sight of this, the savage hordes around me, yelling madly, bounded forward, crowded the tree, clasped it with cups, leaves, hands, and tongues. Each obtained enough of liquid to send him mad and frantic. Then ensued a grotesque and indescribably hideous orgy. May I never see such a sight again. Okay, so this is obviously old school explorer lingo, where they over-describe things to the point where you can barely understand what they're saying. Basically, after the woman drank the fluid and became insane, the tentacles sort of came alive and wrapped around her, coiled around her neck, arms, basically rendering her paralyzed. She couldn't move. And the leaves that branched from the top of the tree down to the floor enclosed around her tightly, almost like how a Venus flytrap traps its prey. So not only does the plant have a hold of her via its tendrils, but also the leaves encapsulate her. And after she was encapsulated by these leaves, that fluid, that sweet liquid, that nectar, started dribbling out of its gaps, and mixed in with this was blood and organs mixed in with this fluid, which suggests it was digesting her pretty damn quickly. Now, as this viscous fluid was running down the base of the tree, all the natives of this tribe ran up to the tree and started collecting the liquid and drinking it. They were even putting their tongues up against the tree and drinking that liquid mixed with the blood and the organs. Then they went into a frenzy and had an orgy. Okay? Now this is like the epitome of old world explorers discussing, quote, savages. This is like exactly how the Western world pictured African tribes at that time. You couldn't get a better example. So it's pretty disgusting. Like very, very macabre. Okay? Now, the last bit of this letter says, the retracted leaves of the great tree kept their upright position for 10 days. Then, when I came one morning, they were prone again, the tendrils stretched, the palpi floating, and nothing but a white skull at the front of the tree to remind me of the sacrifice that had taken place. So it took about 10 days to digest this woman, and then all that was left of her was the skull, which is a little strange. What, it digested all the other bones and just perfectly placed the clean white skull at the base of the tree. Either this never happened or it was embellished greatly. So Liché dubbed the tree Crinoida dagina, after a fancied resemblance to the starfish-related crinoids or sea lilies, and in the honor of a noted Bombay physician, Dr. Bawu Daji. Chase Solomon Osborne, governor of Michigan from 1911 to 1913, journeyed to Madagascar during the early 1920s in the hope of seeing for himself the terrible tree. He did not locate the tree, but he discovered that it was well known to the natives all over the island, and even some of the Western missionaries working there believed in its existence. He also claimed that he had learnt from the very earliest times that Madagascar had been known as the land of the man-eating tree, which he used in the title of his book that he later wrote about his journeys in Madagascar. So that's pretty interesting that this dude later on goes to Madagascar and all the natives are familiar with this tree, and also the missionaries, which for the most part are Westerners that have come to Madagascar to enforce religion into these people. So they talk about it, and also the fact that Madagascar colloquially was known as the land of the man-eating trees. So there could be something to this. A former British Army officer in 1935 went to Madagascar, spent 4 months there, and did find strange-looking trees with human skeletons and skeletons of other animals underneath it, and he took photos of them. Now, the photos were published but have since gone missing and nobody's been able to find them, and a lot of scientists kind of made them out to be a hoax, which is kind of strange. If you're an army officer and you go to Madagascar for 4 months, he didn't go there to look for this tree, but he just took some photos of some interesting trees that just happened to have skeletons underneath them. So it's not like he purposely went out there to hoax this. So it's kind of, strange to just dismiss them as hoaxes. And back then in, the 30s, there's not stuff stored on the internet. So if it's printed on a newspaper somewhere in some city, the chances are it'll go missing, nobody's keeping that newspaper, and you'll probably never find it again. So unfortunately, these photographs have never surfaced in recent times. So interestingly enough, there has been a few witnesses of this tree, and also the tree is pretty well known in Madagascar. Now, a lot of botanists and biologists come out and say that this tree never existed. It was one complete hoax by Leche. The letter, the sighting, everything. And it was pretty much to create more mystery around Madagascar and also paint the natives in a pretty dim light, which I think he succeeded in, with the orgy and everything. So nothing really came to conclusion about this man-eating tree. Nothing really else was done about it. There hasn't really been many other people going out to look for this tree. So the kind of wave of interest in the Madagascan man-eating pineapple tree kind of fizzled out. But there has also been sightings and reports of other man-eating trees on different continents. Quite a few, and we'll get into them. The next man-eating tree is called the Yatavio, which is translated to "I see you already." That's pretty damn creepy as well. The natives see this tree as a bad omen. And I'm going to suggest a theory as to why nobody sees these trees anymore. But I'll get to that at the end after I give you a little bit more information on the "I see you already" tree. So the tree is said to live on a secluded and rarely visited high misty mesa, which is a kind of like a tabletop mountain coming out of the ground. It grows as a singular shrub, so it's just kind of a solitary tree, and it eats human flesh. A dude called J.W. Buell gives the description of this abomination in his seminal work Land and Sea, which was published in 1887. He writes, "Travelers have told of a plant which they assert grows in South America, which is not contended with myriad of larger insects which it catches and consumes, but its voracity extends to the making of humans its prey. This marvelous vegetable minotaur is represented as having a short, thick trunk, from the top of which radiate giant spines, narrow and flexible, but of extraordinary tenaciousness, the edges of which are armed with barbs or dagger-like teeth. Instead of growing upright, or at an inclined angle from the trunk, these spines lay at the outer ends upon the ground, and so gracefully they are distributed that the trunk resembles an easy couch, with green drapery around it. The unfortunate traveller, ignorant of this monstrous creation which lies in his way, and curious to examine the strange plant, or to rest himself upon its inviting stalk, approaches without a suspicion of his certain doom. The moment his feet are set within this circle of horrid spines, they rise up like gigantic serpents, and entwine themselves around him until he is drawn upon the stump, when they speedily drive their daggers into his body, and thus complete the massacre. The body is crushed until every drop of blood is squeezed out of it, and it becomes absorbed by the gore-loving plant. When the dry carcass is thrown out, the horrid trap is set again. So the tree basically creates a trap. So it's got its stump, and then coming out of the top of the stump and down onto the floor and spread out across the floor are the arms of this tree, and it has spines on them. So when people, I guess, come and walk over those trees, or rest up spines and rest up against the base, those spines quickly close, grab the person, lift him up into the middle base of the tree, crush him, and basically wring him out like it's juicing an orange. And it drinks the blood and the gore and all the juices, and then discards of the body. Pretty damn gruesome, if you ask me. So that is the South American one. Now, there is another man-eating plant that is said to live in Nicaragua. A naturalist describes, "Recently returned from Central America, where I spent nearly 2 years in the study of flora and fauna of the country. I relate the findings of a singular growth in one of the swamps which surrounded the Great Lakes of Nicaragua. I engaged in the hunting for botanical and entomological specimens, when I heard a dog cry out, as if in agony, from a distance. Running to the spot where the animal's cries came from, I found him enveloped in a perfect network of what seemed to be a fine rope-like tissue of roots and fibers. The native servants who accompanied me manifested the greatest horror of the vine, which they call the devil's snare, and were full of stories of its death-dealing powers. I was able to discover very little about the nature of this plant, owing to the difficulty of handling it, for its grasp can only be torn away with the loss of skin and even of flesh. But as near as I could ascertain, its power of suction is contained in the number of mouths or little suckers which ordinarily are closed but open for the reception of food. If the substance is animal, the blood is drawn off and the carcass or refuse is then dropped." So very similar to the South American plant, where it grabs a hold of its prey and sucks the juices out or squeezes the juices out, then discards the body. So it could be a similar species or the same species of the South American tree. Now, I've got a few theories as to what these trees are and maybe why we don't see them anymore. People have really not reported seeing these trees since all this happened. So my theory as to why people don't see these trees anymore is they are a nuisance. They kill and eat people, so the natives cut them down every time they see them. That could be a reason why. We do know some trees go extinct. They absolutely do. And if there is a tree that is threatening your tribe or your pets, you're going to cut it down. You'll find a way to cut it down. It's a tree at the end of the day. It's not like it's out there hunting you and moving around the forest. It's in one spot. People know where it is. They can see the tree and go, oh, I'll take note there's a man-eating tree there, and I'll come back with fire and burn the thing down. So that could be why nobody sees these trees anymore. And hell, if there was one of those trees in my backyard, yeah, I'd be torching it pretty damn quickly. For sure. Secondly, there's the whole hypothesis that all these accounts were hoaxes. And it's a very real possibility. It's like the descriptions of dinosaurs in the Congo, or things like that, where explorers embellish their journeys to make out that, they were in this savage place with savage natives. There was man-eating trees, weird animals. It's a story that was invented by explorers. Now, that's not saying that they never explored that area, but they do embellish a lot of their tales. For example, Percy Fawcett, who was mapping the border between, I believe, Bolivia and maybe Brazil, he came back with tales of giant anaconda that were like over 50 feet long, 100 feet long, which is, of course, it's embellished. So there is a real possibility that these stories never took place. Or it's a case of he said, she said, and then it's like, playing telephone, to where the story just gets so blown out of proportion that by the time it gets to publishing, it's not even the same story. It could start off that, oh, there's a lot of spiky, thorny plants in this jungle of Madagascar or South America. Watch out, you'll get caught on it, and it's hard to get off because it's got thorns. It gets trapped in your clothes, and it's hard to get out of. You need to machete your way out of it. And then that becomes, that tree is trying to eat you and will eat you. So it can get embellished so much and inflated to the point where it doesn't actually resemble the original story. Now, what are my thoughts on it? Man, as much as I would love for there to be man-eating trees, I reckon that is the coolest sort of jungle explorer tale. I'm super skeptical about it. For one, what is the likelihood of like a plant having tentacles that resemble almost octopus or snakes moving around so quickly? Pretty low. Plants don't move that quick, in case you don't know that. You look at Venus flytraps. They are our most well-known carnivorous plant, and when it traps an animal, it closes very slowly. It's not an instant, boom, gotcha. It closes so slow that a lot of times the animals have a chance to escape, and often do. So, thinking about a plant that has these snake-like tentacles quivering out the top of it, it's just, we haven't seen that in any other plant. So, what is the likelihood of this one tree having tendrils like this, and it just so happens to be huge? It just so happens to have this sweet nectar. It just so happens to spit the skull out. It's Occam's razor. The likely scenario is often the correct one, okay? The likely scenario is this is completely made up. But who knows? Who knows? The stories of the missionaries describing it, the stories of all the native tribes describing this tree, could also be all made up. There is no way to document this other than the word of the people that were over there taking these people's accounts of this plant. And people lie. Yes, they do. But who knows? There could be man-eating trees in Thorn's jungle. That is the most likely place for these plants to grow as I sip out of my Thorn's jungle mug. So what do you reckon? Comment below what you think of these man-eating plants. I'll be interested to know. And I'll see you next time on another episode of Thorn's Jungle. Let's just hope we don't get eaten by a giant pineapple. Take care.